Final Fantasy is a 37-year-old franchise that has somehow shown up in almost every corner of gaming. We're talking fighting games, Disney movies, pop star cameos, and yes, even Roblox lobbies. Today I'm breaking down every single Final Fantasy crossover and explaining how they happen, starting with the one that makes the least sense on paper, Roblox and Fortnite, the modern metaverse appearances. There is something deeply funny about a franchise built on 80-hour JRPGs showing up in a Roblox lobby next to someone dressed as a bacon hair avatar, but that's exactly what happened. Square Enix pushed Final Fantasy into both Fortnite and Roblox with Cloud Strife cosmetics and limited time storefronts targeting an audience that has almost certainly never heard of Materia. Here's the thing, these weren't deep collaborations, zero narrative integration, zero gameplay crossover, zero lore. You bought a Cloud skin, wore it for a few weeks, and the event window closed. But that was the entire point. This wasn't fan service. This was a calculated land grab. Square Enix looked at where the next generation of potential fans actually spends their time and planted a flag there. Legacy fans called it brand dilution. Square Enix called it strategy. Purely as a business move, kind of genius. Purely as a crossover, the shallowest one on this list. But if you think cosmetic skins in a battle royale are a weird place for Final Fantasy to show up, wait until you hear about the time it crossed over with Nintendo's most legendary franchise, The Legend of Zelda, the Nintendo cameos. Most people think Final Fantasy crossovers started with Kingdom Hearts or Smash Brothers. They're off by about a decade. Back in 1993, Link's Awakening on the original Game Boy quietly snuck Mario enemies into its world. Chain Chomps wandering around as friendly pets, Goombas stomping through side-scrolling sections, piranha plants popping out of pipes, a full-blown Mario invasion hiding inside a Zelda game, and nobody batted an eye because the internet barely existed yet. Then came Super Smash Bros. Cloud Strife has appeared in 2 of the last 3 Smash games. First as DLC in Smash 4, and then returning in Ultimate, complete with Final Fantasy music, Midgar as a stage, and Sephiroth showing up later like he owned the place. Nintendo essentially rolled out the red carpet for Square Enix's Golden Boy. Here's the thing though, this relationship is hilariously one-sided. Nintendo keeps inviting Final Fantasy over for dinner, hosting its characters, playing its music, building its stages, and Square Enix has never once returned the favor. Zero Zelda characters in any Final Fantasy game, not a single Link cameo, not even a rupee on the ground somewhere. Nintendo is basically that friend who always drives and never gets gas money. But if you think a one-sided friendship between gaming giants is weird, wait until you hear about the time Final Fantasy collaborated with actual pop stars. Ariana Grande and Katy Perry, Brave Exvius pop stars. So there's a mobile gacha game called Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. It's got crystals, warriors of light, summoned heroes from across time and space. Standard Final Fantasy stuff, and at some point, somebody in a boardroom looked at this roster of legendary swordsmen and ancient mages and said, you know what this needs? Ariana Grande. And they weren't joking. Brave Exvius ran limited time crossover events featuring both Ariana Grande and Katy Perry as fully playable units. Custom character designs, unique abilities, the whole thing. You could literally put Ariana Grande in your party alongside Cloud Strife and go fight God, which is, you know, not ideal for anyone trying to take the lore seriously. Each event ran for about 2 weeks, and the units were exclusive to those windows. Miss it, and your chance to summon pop royalty into a fantasy war was gone forever. The whole thing generated over 50 million impressions across TikTok and Instagram, meaning more people saw Ariana Grande casting Thundaga than have played most mainline Final Fantasy games. Here's the thing, it actually worked. The events drove massive engagement and pulled in players who had never touched a Final Fantasy game, but the fan base was split right down the middle. Half saw it as genius marketing, the other half saw their beloved franchise doing karaoke. Both sides had a point, but if you think a pop star wielding holy magic is a weird fit, wait until you see what happened when Noctis walked into a Tekken tournament, Tekken 7, Noctis Lucis Calum. Most crossover characters show up in a fighting game and just use the existing mechanics with a new skin. Noctis showed up and forced Bandai Namco to invent new ones. When the Prince of Lucis dropped into Tekken 7 as DLC in March 2018, he brought 47 unique animations with him, and almost none of them played by Tekken's rules. The big problem was Warp Strike. In Final Fantasy XV, Noctis throws his weapon and teleports to wherever it lands. Cool mechanic for an action RPG. Absolutely absolute nightmare for a fighting game built on precise spacing and frame data. Tekken's competitive identity revolves around footsies, sidestepping, and punishing whiffed attacks at specific distances. Noctis just ignored all of that. He could close gaps that shouldn't be closable, and reposition in ways no other character on the roster could replicate. Bandai Namco had to write entirely new code to make the teleport function within Tekken's engine. The system literally didn't support what Noctis needed to do. And here's the thing, the fighting game community noticed immediately. The visual authenticity was praised across the board. He looked like Noctis, moved like Noctis, felt like a faithful recreation. But the competitive crowd had a very different conversation, which mostly boiled down to this guy is broken and I hate fighting him. His teleport mechanics created matchup problems that didn't exist before he showed up, which is, you know, not ideal for a game with a professional tournament scene. All of that for $5.99. A bargain if you enjoy watching ranked players lose their minds. But if you think dropping a fantasy prince into a fighting game is a weird crossover, wait until you see what happened when Final Fantasy showed up in ancient Egypt. Assassin's Creed Origins, a gift from the gods. There's something deeply funny about taking a character who drives a luxury car and teleports swords out of thin air, and dropping his entire wardrobe into ancient Egypt. But that's exactly what happened in late 2017 when Assassin's Creed Origins and Final Fantasy XV decided to just swap clothes for a few months. The collaboration let players dress Bayek, a Medjay operating roughly 49 BC, in Noctis-inspired armor and weapons. Full futuristic anime prince aesthetic, in the desert, fighting hyenas. It's like putting a tuxedo on a camel. Nobody asked for it, but you can't look away. Here's the thing though, this wasn't just a funny cosmetic gag. This was one of the first times two massive 8AA single-player open-world franchises crossed over with each other. Fighting games do crossovers constantly. Mobile games practically breathe them, but single-player open-world games? Those are sacred territory. They're supposed to be immersive, self-contained experiences where you forget the outside world exists. Shoving a Japanese prince's glowing sword into Ptolemaic Egypt is the exact opposite of that philosophy, and both Ubisoft and Square Enix leaned into the absurdity completely. The gear was cosmetic only, no story integration, no lore justification, just vibes. The Final Fantasy XV side ran its Assassin's Festival event for about 5 months, from late August 2017 through January 2018, because apparently even crossover schedules need to be confusing, but what it proved was simple. By the late 2010s, no franchise pairing was too weird. If ancient Egypt and anime royalty could coexist, anything was on the table. And speaking of unlikely Square Enix pairings, the next one kept things in the family, but somehow made it even stranger. Dragon Quest X, The Breaking Brick. Here's a crossover that most of you have literally never heard of, and honestly, that's kind of the point. In 2014, Square Enix did something quietly unprecedented. They took their massive MMO properties, Final Fantasy XIV, Final Fantasy XI, and Dragon Quest X Online, and just smashed them into each other. No massive marketing push, no global announcement tour, just a series of crossover events that let Dragon Quest players walk around in Final Fantasy inspired armor, swing FF weapons, and complete special quest lines built specifically for the collaboration. And here's what separates this from your standard. Here's a cosmetic skin, have fun crossover. These events actually had narrative integration. Dragon Quest characters encountered Final Fantasy related NPCs within the game world. There were actual story beats, actual dialogue, multiple fictional universes acknowledging each other's existence through gameplay, not just a loading screen ad. Square Enix crossed 3 of its own flagship MMOs into each other simultaneously. The same publisher owns all 3 properties, and it still took them years to try it. It's like finding out that 3 siblings living in the same house have never spoken to each other. Turns out, no. But here's the kicker. Western players missed almost all of it. Dragon Quest X has had essentially 0 English localization for most of its lifespan, so unless you were actively playing the Japanese version, these crossovers just didn't exist for you. Some of the most significant Final Fantasy collaborations ever made, and they might as well have been a secret. Square Enix basically ran a quiet experiment to see if their own universes could talk to each other, and then told nobody about it, which is, you know, not ideal. But if you think a hidden MMO crossover is a strange place to find Final Fantasy, wait until you see where Cloud ended up next. Super Smash Bros. Cloud and Sephiroth. Let me put this in perspective. Super Smash Bros. Had been letting third-party characters in since Brawl. Sonic, Snake, Mega Man, Pac-Man, Ryu. The door was already open, but every single one of those characters had deep history with Nintendo hardware. Then in December 2015, Cloud Strife walked in and the room went silent. Cloud was a PlayStation icon. Final Fantasy VII never released on a Nintendo console during its original run. The guy was literally the mascot for Sony's war against Nintendo in the late 90s. And now he was standing next to Mario throwing Buster Sword swings at Kirby. The licensing negotiations alone took over 2 years. Sonic was a rival, sure, but Sega had been putting games on Nintendo hardware for years by that point. Cloud had zero meaningful Nintendo presence, just $2 billion companies staring at each other across a table going, so, do we do this? They did it, and it changed everything. Cloud's inclusion shattered the idea that Smash characters needed a real Nintendo connection. If Cloud could be in Smash, anyone could be in Smash. That single DLC slot rewrote the rules for how companies think about platform identity, but then Nintendo doubled down. In December 2020, Sephiroth got announced for Ultimate, complete with a unique Safer Sephiroth boss fight that had no business being that cinematic in a game where Jigglypuff exists. Gaming's most iconic villain, casually joining a roster that includes a yoga instructor and a dog who laughs at you. Naturally, the internet lost its mind, not because Sephiroth was a bad pick, but because every DLC slot that went to a Final Fantasy character was a slot that didn't go to Waluigi. People were writing essays about who deserved to be in a party game, which is, you know, a completely normal thing to do with your evening. But if you think 2 Final Fantasy characters crashing Nintendo's roster is a wild crossover, wait until you see what happened when a behemoth showed up in Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter World: The Behemoth Hunt. In August 2018, Capcom and Square Enix decided to do something nobody had ever attempted in the Monster Hunter franchise. They took Behemoth, one of Final Fantasy XIV's most iconic raid bosses, and dropped it directly into Monster Hunter World. First time a Final Fantasy exclusive monster had ever crossed into Monster Hunter. Sounds awesome on paper, and it was for about 45 minutes. Here's the thing, Monster Hunter World was designed around a very specific philosophy. You track a monster, you learn its patterns, you chip away at its health solo or with a small group, and eventually you win because you got better. Final Fantasy XIV raids work completely differently. They're designed for coordinated teams executing specific roles under extreme pressure. Behemoth brought that entire raid philosophy with it, and Monster Hunter's player base was not ready. Behemoth launched with a base HP of around 39,550 in solo, which is already massive, but that number scaled even higher in multiplayer, and the HP wasn't even the real problem. The real problem was the mechanics. Behemoth used Ecliptic Meteor, a one-shot kill attack that required players to hide behind comets dropped during the fight. Miss your positioning by 2 seconds? Dead. Entire party wiped. This was raid design injected into a game where most players had never needed to think about positioning in their lives. The result was catastrophic. Both the Monster Hunter community and the Final Fantasy XIV community, 2 groups that normally have zero overlap, merged into a single unified voice of frustration. Emergency balance patches had to roll out 3 weeks after release. 3 weeks of collective suffering. But then, something genuinely cool happened. Players adapted, they learned the mechanics, coordinated their roles, and started farming Behemoth for the Draken armor set, a full Dragoon-themed kit pulled straight from Final Fantasy XIV. What started as a disaster became a badge of honor. 2 very different games collided, broke on impact, got duct-taped back together, and somehow created one of the most memorable crossover events in either franchise's history, which is a nice story about collaboration and triumph. The next crossover though, that one went even deeper. Nier Automata: The Yorha Dark Apocalypse. Most crossovers give you a costume and call it a day. Maybe a weapon skin if they're feeling generous. The Yorha Dark Apocalypse raid series in Final Fantasy XIV gave players 15 hours of original narrative content that functions as an actual continuation of Nier Automata's story. Not a reference, not a nod, a canonical sequel written inside someone else's game. Let that sink in for a second. Starting in 2019 and running through 2021, this collaboration spanned 3 major patches and delivered 3 full 24-player raid tiers, each one built on the last, introducing exclusive characters, original boss designs, and story beats that genuinely mattered to the Nayar timeline. Players could earn 2B and 9S armor appearances, sure, but the cosmetics were almost an afterthought compared to what was actually happening underneath. Here's what makes this one different from literally every other crossover on this list. Yoko Taro, the creator of Nier, personally oversaw the entire thing. He didn't just sign off on it, he wrote it, he designed encounters, he made sure every piece of dialogue and every narrative twist carried the same weight as his mainline work. The man essentially used Final Fantasy XIV as a delivery system for more NieR content, and Square Enix just let him do it. The result is the most narratively deep crossover series in FF14's history, and it's not particularly close. NieR fans point to it as proof that their franchise deserves full mainline treatment, not just side projects and mobile spin-offs. Meanwhile, FF14 players are still arguing about whether crossover raids should be considered essential for understanding the game's broader story. Both sides have a point, honestly. 2 years, 3 patches, 24 players per raid, one very strange man writing canonical story content inside another studio's MMO. That's not a crossover. That's a hostile narrative takeover executed with a smile. But if you think embedding an entire sequel inside someone else's game is the wildest thing Final Fantasy has ever done with a crossover, you clearly haven't thought about Kingdom Hearts hard enough. Kingdom Hearts, the Disney connection. Every crossover we've talked about so far has one thing in common. They're crossovers. Guest appearances, limited events, DLC packs, cosmetic bundles. A character visits someone else's world, hangs out for a bit, and goes home. Kingdom Hearts isn't that. Kingdom Hearts is what happens when a crossover becomes its own universe. In 2002, Square Enix and Disney did something that sounded absolutely insane on paper. They merged Final Fantasy characters with Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, and dozens of Disney properties into a single action RPG with an original story. Cloud, Sephiroth, Squall, Aerith, Yuffie, they're not cameos in these games. They're woven into the narrative as mentors, rivals, and allies. Squall literally goes by a different name. Aerith runs a restoration committee. Cloud has an entire emotional arc about confronting his darkness, which, you know, tracks. And then the franchise just kept going, and going, and going. Over 15 titles across mainline games, spin-offs, handheld entries, mobile games, and whatever else they could fit a Keyblade into. 20 plus years of continuous releases stretching all the way through 2026. The story sprawls across timelines, dream worlds, data simulations, and at least 3 different versions of the afterlife. Whether any of it makes coherent sense is one of gaming's most passionate ongoing debates, and honestly, both sides have excellent points. But here's the number that matters. The Kingdom Hearts franchise has shipped over 36 million units worldwide. Across 2 decades and more than a dozen titles, that's a staggering amount of people who willingly signed up to watch Donald Duck cast magic next to a guy with a giant key. That's not a crossover. That's an economic superpower born from a handshake between a spiky-haired sword guy and a cartoon mouse. And that's really the point of all of this. Kingdom Hearts proved at the Free-Play scale that deep narrative integration between Western IP and Japanese gaming franchises doesn't just work, it can become one of the most successful experiments in entertainment history. It fundamentally reshaped how the entire industry thinks about franchise collaborations, from Roblox skins to Fortnite cosmetics to fighting game DLC to full 24-player raid series to a multi-billion-dollar franchise that's been running for over 2 decades. Final Fantasy doesn't just cross over into other worlds. It moves in, redecorates, and never leaves, and somehow every single time it works. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.